I'll just get started and we can jump right into it. My name is Avi, and I will be the director of the Historical Security Council at this year's HMUN India. I have a good amount of Model UN experience. I've done a range of topics on a range of committees, but I really, really like security councils, so I'm really excited to be giving this webinar on this topic. Um, so the way I'd like for this to run is I will talk a little bit about my experience, and then I will talk a little bit about HMUN security councils in particular. I will try to cover as much as Rohan, the director of the UNSC at this year's HMUN India, would cover, but otherwise I will also be talking more generally about security councils, why they're special, and then we can also jump to other topics if you'd like to. We don't have to keep it super specific. I really like questions. So this is why I wanted you guys to use the chat feature. I wanted to see and make sure that it could work so that we could use it much more. So please feel free to jump in whenever you have a question about something I've said or about something that you think I said that was weird and like, oh, that shouldn't make sense. Or really just like anything you want to know. So remember, questions are awesome, and I will actually be pausing a lot for questions. So make sure you have them ready. All right, sweet, let's begin. So, Security Council. What is the Security Council? The Security Council is a body that comprises 15 member states, started with 11, and it is it is the body within the United Nations that has the most decision-making power. Security councils are special because they have the ability to sanction, to condemn actions, and they can also take military action. So, really, security councils are, like in General Assemblies, a lot of people think that most of the time what you're doing is recommending things. Security Council is the body that can take action on those recommendations. So it's a really interesting concept. At HMUN specifically, we chose to make security councils double delegation, even though they were in the specialized agency crisis sort of organ, which is mostly single delegation, for a couple of reasons. One, the Security Council is a completely different experience. It has parliamentary procedures, so make sure if you haven't checked out a webinar on that, you should definitely do it. We have some great information in those webinars. And security councils often have, like other General Assembly committees, ECOSOC type committees, they have draft resolutions. They have like standard other parts of debate, like moderated caucuses, unmoderated caucuses. Basically, the Security Council, I like to think of it as a more intense, more concentrated General Assembly committee because it has all the elements of the General Assembly, but it also is a lot smaller. Security Councils also tend to attract more of the experienced delegates because of the intensity and the pace of the committee. So because it's a smaller committee, people are speaking much more often, people are saying much more things, and everything that they say has more weight because they can put it directly into action. Okay, awesome. We have a question. So I am going to right now pause my little monologue and I will take care of the question. How exactly does a double delegation work? Any tips for success for the pair? This is a great question, and in fact, this also determines a lot about your performance overall. So I will spend a little bit of time talking about it. But before I do that, I want to make sure we have enough light. I am doing this in my room. It is currently 7:30 a.m. So as you can see, I am very, very dedicated to HMUN India, and I hope you guys are excited. So how exactly does a double delegation work? Basically, it can work as however you want to. It essentially means that you have two people that represent your country equally. I have seen several different styles of double delegation. I have seen styles where there is one older, more senior member of the pair. Okay, and I'll also tie in how a double delegation will be assessed. And it's important to remember that, actually, I'll take care of this question first. It's important to remember that regardless of how you want to set up a double delegation, it will be judged as a pair. Individuals will not be judged. Individuals will contribute to the performance of the overall double delegation, but because both of you are expected to represent the country that you are equally, you will be judged as a pair. That also means, however, that you could have one person who's more experienced, stronger, and kind of show the ropes to a younger, more inexperienced member in the pair. And this happens a lot, actually. So I'll go right in and talk about the two different styles. One style is exactly what I just said. One experienced member, one younger member, who the experienced member, usually an older member of the team, a more senior member, someone who's probably done a security council before, and the younger member obviously doesn't have as much experience but is really interested in security councils or has potential to do really well in them. So that style typically has this one senior member kind of showing and teaching the younger member more about what's going on. I personally have never been a part of that kind of team, but I have seen it be very effective. The other style is, of course, where the two members of the double delegation are both equally experienced or very experienced. They kind of take on different kinds of roles. They are relatively on the same page, and they like know exactly what to expect from the other one. And this one is much more of like a um, collaborative kind of style of representing a country. And I personally think that this is something that I'm more comfortable with, but of course it like in terms of judgment or like assessing delegate performance, having the first style will not hurt you at all, and in fact can be quite effective. Um, and I'll go more into why the Security Council has double delegations, because if if it is supposed to run like a smaller committee, it does make sense that one person could typically fill the role, but because of a couple of attributes of the Security Council, it can't. And I'll tell you about why right now. So first of all, like I said, parliamentary procedure, you're expected to write a draft resolution. This is really important. Draft resolutions are expected and going to be required as part of debate at HMUN India. Definitely in the Historical Security Council and almost definitely in the United Nations Security Council. Security councils produce resolutions. This is so important to know. And resolutions are supposed to be formatted properly in the usual United Nations format. We will be able to go over that much more in detail at the actual conference. But I mean, Security Council resolutions are the real deal. They are sanction these guys, take this specific action. They are very, very specific. They are also much shorter than usual. I would say I've never seen a Security Council resolution that was passed effectively be more than 3 pages long. Because the style of debate is much more intense, and because you can have more people incorporate their feedback much more quickly, having a longer resolution really, really hurts. Because there are more things to pick out, there are more things to complain about, there are more things that are redundant or just unnecessary and don't contribute to the forward motion of debate. So, the process by which resolutions are formed and are brought into, I will take that question right after I talk a little bit more about why it's important to have them as a pair. Because of the way that draft resolutions are formed and are like debated and then merged and then kind of amended, and because of the smaller format of the Security Council, they really, really do take up a lot of time. And this is probably one of the most interesting and fun parts of any Security Council, because the negotiation process that can kind of get watered down in General Assemblies by just the sheer amount of people that are involved really does become intense and rewarding and thorough in Security Councils. So there's definitely that part. Second part, and I expect to be getting a lot of questions about this, so I want to make sure that I open this up to anyone that has any questions beforehand. Security councils are going to have crisis elements, and that is the major reason that they are double delegation, because you have both the crisis element side and the resolution parliamentary procedure side, which does make them a tricky body to deal with. So before I talk more about the crisis elements part, I am going to tackle this question. I'll just read it out loud. For double delegations, are both required to contribute equally in terms of lobbying, speeches, and writing, or can they split roles? This is a great question, and I will say, for my committee, I will be happy to. Okay. As chair, I personally would be happy with either system for double delegations. Both can contribute equally in all aspects. Both can also specialize. So you can have one person who's stronger at speaking, you can have one person that's stronger with writing, you can have one person inside the room who's doing a lot of the negotiating, you can have another person outside of the room handling more of the crisis elements. It really doesn't matter. You can just specialize, or you can kind of just handle both. Both people can speak, both people can help write, both people can help with other elements of the committee. As long as it seems that you are contributing equally to your partner's contribution, or like in a manner that you, at the level that you are expected to contribute based on your experience level, and we'll make sure to take care of that beforehand, then you'll be fine. So I would say for that question, both work. Now, I'm getting a lot of other questions. This is great. Keep them coming. This is awesome. If the double delegation is assessed as a pair, then will the awards be different as well? If so, what would they be? This is, I think what this question means to ask is are the awards going to be different for each of the delegates in the pair? I'm going to ask 6, 8, 9, 7 to rephrase that question. Basically, because the double delegation is being assessed as a pair, that means that it doesn't matter, like one individual delegate can be super strong, but the other individual delegate may not be as strong, and that's going to kind of factor in to the overall performance of the delegation. So if one member of the United Kingdom is super a great speaker but can't write, and the other delegate of the United Kingdom can write really well but doesn't speak too much, that's going to be factored in, and that's going to kind of like weigh out. Does that make sense? Just want to make sure. And if it doesn't, please feel free to include another question. Okay, this is kind of changing gears, but I'm happy to do so. How do you suggest research should be done for the purpose of the Historical Security Council? This is a great question, and I will try to handle this as thoroughly, but also I want to make sure that you guys understand that like you should research as much as possible. Security Council, especially the Historical Security Council, is going to be an interesting committee to research. I would say try to find as many news articles, as many press releases, as many like books that talk about the historical account of the era. Just make sure that you understand that nothing after, in this case, 1949 has actually happened. Anything can change. So, because of that, it is important to remember that your research must not be influenced or informed by things that happened after 1949, but really just understand your country's policy at the time, understand why they made the decisions they made in the future, and be ready to make very different decisions. Security Council is not the only committee with crisis. That is important to remember, but not every committee has it as well. I am specifically talking about the United Nations Security Council and the Historical Security Council. Does that make sense? Just want to make sure I clarified that. I believe at HMUN there are 4 committees that are going to be having crisis elements, but you should double check the website for that. Okay, I think we got a rephrase question. What are the awards up for a double delegation committee? So because and don't quote me on this, I think this is the case, but I'm not completely sure. Because the double delegation committee is still in the specialized agency portion, I think there's only going to be 1 best delegate, 1 outstanding delegate, and 1 honorable mention. I think there are just going to be 3 awards because they are smaller committees and there are fewer numbers of delegates. And those are going to be awarded to the pairs. Does that make sense? Cool. Does anyone have any other questions before I continue? Do you guys have any preferences for what you want me to talk about? Like, I can talk more about like how Parley Pro in a Security Council works. I mean, it's basically the same as Parley Pro in any committee that uses Parley Pro, or I can talk more about the crisis elements. Perfect. Okay. I'll talk a little bit more about the crisis elements. So the way crisis elements work is essentially crisis means that there are going to be reactions to the actions that you take as a committee. What does this mean? This means that if you are talking about or discussing something in committee, or if you make a request to delegates, then not a request, excuse me, not a request to delegates, a request to the chair, then that request is going to be put into action, and then there is going to be like a crisis team on the data staff involved in making that change happen. So you're going to receive a press release, or you're going to receive some sort of like news article, or you're going to receive some sort of verbal update about what has happened in reaction to the things you were talking about or the actions you have taken. Now, this is going to work differently based on the committee, so I'll speak much more about the Historical Security Council and how this is going to happen. With the Historical Security Council, we are going to incorporate things called directives, communiques, and press releases. Directives are just shorter draft resolutions that are going to be put into action much more quickly. Instead of having it wait as like a resolution would wait, I'm expecting directives to take no more than an hour and a half to create and pass, which is really quick for security councils because everyone can, people can veto and people always disagree much more. This means that for delegates, the expectations are that they are always prepared to react to any situation. Crises can come up without delegates even doing anything. They may just be pushing delegates in a specific direction. And this is all at the discretion of the crisis staff, which at HMUN India is going to double as the data staff. So I'll give an example of a crisis because I feel like this will help much more. Let's say we are talking about the Syrian civil war. One example of a crisis would be, and this would be especially relevant to the Security Council, that it has been confirmed that Bashar Assad is using chemical weapons. So because of this development, the Security Council now has to change the topic of discussion, and it has to react much more quickly in order to ensure that Bashar Assad's use of chemical weapons does not go unanswered and does not cause more problems and more humanitarian conflict than it already has. Does that make sense? And the way that delegates can answer this crisis is through something like a directive where they take immediate action. They can ask Bashar Assad to come into the room, and then we would have a representative pretend to be Bashar Assad and negotiate with the committee, or they can issue a press release and say the United Nations Security Council condemns the actions of Bashar Assad and are working swiftly to come up with a solution, something like that. So these are the different actions you can take, and we will also be talking much more about this when committee starts. So please don't worry if this isn't completely clear to you. Just remember that these are going to be action-reaction committees just to make them much more fast-paced. This is also another reason why they're double delegate, because there's a lot that is expected of the delegates. I got a couple more questions, so I'm going to start talking. I'll just try to answer these a little bit more. So the next question is, are delegates involved in a crisis allowed/expected to change foreign policy? This is a very interesting question, and I will take the safe route, and I will say, if you have done your research and things happen in committee that are different from history, and you feel that it makes sense for you to change your policy based on those actions, then you should absolutely do it. Feel free. You are representing your country. You are representing your country's policy at this point. As long as it is realistic, and we will know what is realistic, of course, then you will be fine. You can also ask us if you think something is realistic, and we'll give you our honest opinion. Okay. Next question. Any changes with respect to rules of procedure? This is a great question. And don't worry. Once again, this is an interesting format to be answering all of these questions. I am happy to answer them much more thoroughly, like later on in this webinar or during committee. Just remember, this is a very new system. We have tried it out before and it has worked, but we want to make sure that you are all as prepared as possible for it. So, are delegates involved? Any changes with respect to rules of procedure? Yes and no. Okay, I wasn't planning on talking about this, but I'll just talk about this briefly. I'm actually incorporating a change in my Parley Pro, and I'm gonna explain it much more thoroughly. It is called an informal consultation of the whole. It's basically a moderated, unmoderated caucus where I won't be calling on anyone anymore, and instead the delegates will be calling on each other. So this is, of course, organized chaos in the best way possible, but I feel like I found it to be a much faster way for delegates to get their ideas out and for delegates not to get kind of caught up in the sweep of an unmoderated caucus, leaving some people out. So I like this. But otherwise, there will be no changes to parliamentary procedure. We will do all the same stuff, speakers list, moderated caucus, unmoderated caucus, that kind of stuff. Cool. So will the outstanding delegate be awarded to both delegates or just one? Both delegates. Both delegates that represent a country will be awarded the honor. Would you be looking at history connections such as World War I, the Cold War, etc.? Yes. Pretty much, yes. Do the executive board look at aggressive debate between the P5? So this is an interesting question, and I'm going to kind of answer a related question to this. I personally, and I think Rohan also shares this belief. For those of you that don't know, Rohan is the director of the Security Council. So, like, that's why I keep mentioning him, because he is going to be directing the other body that is relevant to this webinar. I personally want to emphasize as much contribution from everyone in debate. This includes countries outside of the P5. And this also means that those countries need to be prepared to have crises that directly relate to them. Even if they aren't currently directly involved in the conflict, they should expect to somehow be involved at some point during the conference. Sorry, I just got a new question. I just want to make sure I can tie this in. I think I'm going to be careful about answering the aggressive discussion part because I want to make sure I'm not being specific about this. I think during committee it will be much more clear what aggressive debate means. But if this means that countries are singling out other countries and criticizing other actions that have taken place in a more passionate manner, then that is completely acceptable. This is supposed to be negotiating at the highest level, and this is exactly what happened. So if you feel the need to criticize Russia openly, or excuse me, the Soviet Union openly for actions that they have taken in the past, and it isn't shouting, but it's loud speaking, that's completely fine, and that is entirely acceptable. But I just want to clarify that this doesn't only apply to the P5. This applies to every single delegate in the room. And we will make that much more clear during debate. Considering foreign policy, okay, I think I just answered that question as well. Also, if you feel like I haven't answered your question, please re-ask it, because now we got a lot more coming and this is really fun. Woo! And also, I want to make sure that we have time, so I'm going to be taking questions for like 20 more minutes, and then we'll do a kind of crisis simulation that would be relevant to the Security Council, just so people are much more familiar with what I'm talking about. So, could you please elaborate on the crisis you speak about? Sure, crisis can be, so I'll give an example of a crisis update again. Let's say right now we're talking about like the conflict in the Sudan. Like, just for a brief background, South Sudan has been engaged in a civil war for a long time, and because there's a lot of oil in South Sudan, everyone's really worried about what this civil war means for oil supplies all over the world. So if the Security Council were going to be debating this topic, they would try to come up with a solution to like calm down the civil war, to secure the oil, to essentially make sure that everything is okay, right? And like prevent as many humanitarian conflicts as possible. But a crisis update could come saying that the oil, like a refinery in South Sudan has just been exploded. We're not sure who did it, but we need to take care of it immediately before this escalates the war further. So because this is a crisis update, this just came up immediately. Also, side note, there's going to be a whole webinar on crisis, which I highly encourage every single person doing a Security Council to watch. It's going to be on Saturday. I'm not sure what time it is, but I know Joe Hall is going to be running it, and he's fantastic, so you should definitely look into it. Because this refinery just exploded, and now you need to deal with that immediately, you're going to kind of sideline the longer-term discussion about how to end the conflict in South Sudan, and you're going to figure out, what should I do specifically about this refinery blowing up? We should launch an investigation, figure out who was responsible for blowing up this refinery. Then we should bring them to justice and make sure that they are like essentially paying the price for this illegal act. And that is something that you as a Security Council would take on directly. Does that make some more sense as crisis? Feel free to ask me more specific questions about crisis. I definitely can talk about it much more at length. But I also think the example will help with that. Okay. Allegations can be made on nations in the United Nations Security Council. So by allegations, I'm going to be thinking of two different things. One, allegations specifically about things that other countries have done, and two, allegations about things that other countries have not done. Both are okay. If you have taken an illegal action through crisis, and you want to blame it on another country, that's completely fine. Just make sure you understand that this will probably not stand. If you want to make an allegation on something that another country has already done, then that is also completely fine. If you want to yell at the United States for invading Iraq, please feel free, go for it. Just make sure that there's a purpose to it. Don't just stand up and yell for the sake of having your voice heard. There should always be a purpose to an allegation that you make. Moderated caucuses will be timed to the second. And the way I like to debate is, if you have a 30-second moderated caucus, I will tap my gavel at 10 seconds left, bang it at 30 seconds left. But when I bang it at 30 seconds left, you can finish your sentence. So you don't have to stop in the middle of your sentence. You can still finish your statement. How many delegates will be taking part in the HSC? There will be 22 delegates in the HSC, and I have no clue how many are in the European Commission. How much does diplomacy matter in the Security Council? Diplomacy is everything in the Security Council. Diplomacy is the most important thing among everything else. Yes, you can make allegations. Yes, you can yell at other countries, but you must do so in a manner that is diplomatic. And everyone has different definitions of diplomacy, so I'll just give a rough idea of mine right now. To me, diplomacy means that you are trying to be productive. You are trying to move debate forward, you're trying to come up with a solution, and you're doing so in the most productive manner possible. So if you are diplomatic, you are getting both sides of an issue to work together toward an agreement. You are mediating discussions, you are leading debate, not as a dominant force on one side, but as someone who is bringing both sides together if there are two sides. If there are more than two sides, then you are bringing everyone together. I'm really going to be looking for that person who is diplomatic to the point where they are getting solutions passed. And the way to do that in the Security Council is to have as many people agree as possible, especially when you have 5 countries that can veto. So diplomacy is the most important thing in any kind of Security Council, 100%, no question about it. What can the United Nations Security Council do if a country violates a UN convention? This is interesting. I think we're going to have to take this case by case. There's a couple of different actions that they can take. They can sanction the country immediately, or they can kick them out of the United Nations. But like I said, because this is a really, this has to be taken case by case. I'm just being more general about what can happen. Thank you for that answer on the European Commission. Does Rohan, the chair of the UNSC, share the same opinions as you with respect to aggressive debate? Yes, 100%. We've been on a Security Council before as a double delegation. He will be okay with passionate debate, but he will want to make sure that it has purpose, and he will also want to make sure that it is not offensive in any way. It needs to be diplomatic. What should one delegate do if a delegate makes a factual inaccuracy in his/her speech? If a delegate makes a factual inaccuracy in his/her speech, do not do a right of information, first of all. That is not what the right of information is for. When you are chosen to speak, you can point out the factual inaccuracy, and then it will be incorporated into the overall flow of debate. It should not be if there is a factual inaccuracy that pertains to a country's policy, that is how you would handle it. You would get up, you would make a speech, and you would say, this is a factual inaccuracy. If it is something that has to do more with procedure, then you should say right of procedure. If it is something to do more with crisis, then we will take care of it. And if we're not taking care of it, you should tell us so that we can take care of it. So let's say crisis said that not Ukraine was being invaded, but Georgia was being invaded by Russia. and this delegate says, oh, well, Ukraine is being invaded by Russia, so we need to do something. At that point, you could point out, excuse me, Honorable Chair, did you say that Ukraine would be invaded by Russia or Georgia? And we would clarify Georgia. Does that make more sense? How will the delegates be assessed for awards? This is a very, very big question. Honestly, we will be, like, the factor I look for most, and it's different for every chair, is how diplomatic was the delegate? How productive were they? How much were they integral to moving debate forward? How much were they the reason the solutions took place in committee? This happens through crisis. This happens through like regular resolution writing. But this is also something we can talk much more at length about during committee. I want to make sure that we talk as much about the specific Security Council format. And this question is much more general for all committees. For example, if I want to call upon, make an allegation on a country, how exactly to do it? Honestly, you can just make it you can just bring up an allegation against a country during a speech. So like in a moderated caucus, if your country is called on and you want to say, hey, Russia has been doing some really shady stuff, that is when you would say it. There's no like formal procedure to make an allegation. You can also do it in a directive, which is like a quicker, shorter version of a draft resolution, can have as few as 3 clauses even, and say, the United Nations Security Council condemns this nation for doing this stuff. Put it into writing, have other countries sign off on it, and have other countries vote on it. Does that make more sense? Will there be crisis notes in the Security Council? Yes, there will be crisis notes in the Security Council, but I don't think I'll have time to talk about them, and I think that the example will be much better at explaining what the crisis notes are. So I'll leave it for that. Can a delegate attend only half a committee session on handle something? Yes, this is okay. And this is actually, so the question is, can a delegate attend only half the committee session and handle side negotiations while the other stays in committee in a double delegation? Yes, this is entirely appropriate as long as both delegates are still doing like work related to the committee session. One delegate doesn't have to be in the room the entire time. This is a huge advantage of security councils because you don't need an unmoderated caucus to be negotiating. You can have one person be outside talking about a draft resolution or a directive that needs to be passed soon, and you can really expedite the process by having one person inside, one person outside. As long as you have at least one person in the room whenever there is anything but an unmoderated caucus, you are fine. Great question. That is a good question. Can all points be briefly explained? Sure. So I will really quickly touch on them. There is a point of order, which is when someone does something that is not related to the procedure directly at hand. So if someone is talking about something that is off topic from the subject of the moderated caucus, that is a point of order. Point of parliamentary inquiry is just a question about parliamentary procedure. Point of personal preference is like, the temperature is weird, I want it to be changed. And I'm forgetting a lot, but we can also, like, this will all be included in the delegate handbook. And once again, I highly encourage you to check out the upcoming right of procedure webinar, because this will be touched on much more in depth. For double delegations, are the GSL supposed to be delivered by the... Could you clarify what you mean by GSL? I am not sure what that acronym stands for. But I'm also going to answer this question much more generally. Speeches are not expected to be delivered by both delegates. Some people find it comfortable to just say everything that they have and split it up equally. General speakers list, thank you. Okay, just making sure. There is no specific expectation for the general speakers list other than meeting the time requirement and like whatever other motions come afterwards. The general speakers list can be, like the speech at the general speakers list can be given by one person, it can be given by both people, it can be given 90% by one person and 10% by another person. Just keep in mind that there are like varying levels of effectiveness with each of those combinations. I personally like one person to have the speech, but I have seen it be very effective when two people equally divide the speech. So really, it's up to you guys. And that's also my general style. Like, I am much more about the delegates creating their experiences, and delegates that are going to be in committees like security councils typically are already high level, pretty experienced with Model UN. It's really just about challenging them and pushing them further and putting them in an environment where they're going to learn a lot by like giving them crisis updates constantly or just making the committee put pressure on them or other kinds of things like this. This is also why I'm a huge fan of delegate-driven crises. Like in committees that I run, I typically don't have more than 2 crisis notes that I produce originally. Everything else is delegate-driven. So I'll talk about that much more in 5 minutes. Georgia has already been invaded. Yes, someone knew that. Sweet. Awesome. Good stuff. How important are position papers? Does the executive board actually read all of them? What are they used for? Easy question. Position papers are important. We do read all of them, and they are used to help determine awards. Plain and simple. How to approach a crisis situation. I will talk about this in 5 minutes once I give the example. But before that, does anyone have any other questions? These are great. Please keep them coming. I think there are a couple questions that I kind of just glanced over, so I can also go back and answer those. Okay, I will talk a little bit about crisis. Now I'll just jump into the crisis simulation. So basically this is going to take about 15 minutes. We're going to be finishing this webinar at 8:30, 8:35. Perfect. Great question, because I'm about to answer that. The question was, what are portfolio orders? And I'll answer that right now. Also, before I do that, I just got another question about point of orders. A factual inaccuracy cannot be raised as a point of order. Plain and simple. And before that, Rohan's stance on aggressive debate in committee with military use is that he encourages it as long as it is productive and diplomatic and appropriate. I hope that is helpful. I definitely encourage you to email him if you have any specific questions, because he will be able to respond to that much more thoroughly. Okay, let's go right into the crisis situation. So basically, what's going to happen right now is all of you are going to be representing yourselves, because I can't assign countries to you. And if I wanted to assign countries to you, then it would take a really long time. I'm going to present you with a situation. I'm going to present you with a crisis, and I'm going to ask you all to come up with crisis notes that you would incorporate if you were to represent a general in a cabinet of that country. So all of you right now are going to represent a general of the United States. Does that make sense? Congratulations, you have made it. Just kidding. So once again, I'll repeat that really quick. All of you right now are going to be representing a general of the United States. You can come up with more specifics about your policies. I am just going to present you with a crisis situation, and I'm going to walk you through how you may respond to it as a general of the United States, because this will give you a much more fleshed out idea about what you can do as a Security Council representative. Let's say that Donald Trump has just said he's going to run for president, which has just happened. Donald Trump is crazy, but we can talk much more about that outside of this. Donald Trump is going to run for president, and you hear that because of this, other countries are getting really scared that they're going to have a president that is much more aggressive and anti-immigration. And because of this, you also have countries like Mexico who are being directly insulted by Donald Trump. Now, as a United States general, you can choose one side. You are either pro-Trump or anti-Trump, okay? You love Trump, you love everything he's saying, anti-immigration, basically that's all you need to care about. Or you're against Trump, you hate immigration, you hate what he says about immigration, you don't think he says anything that makes sense, and you just don't want anything about him to be taken seriously. So, here's the crisis update. That is basically just painting the situation. Basically, you are a United States general, you have a lot of power in your hands, you control a bunch of armed forces, and you are now supposed to support the interests of the United States to the best of your ability. Here's the crisis update. Mexico, because of what Donald Trump has been saying about its civilians, is planning to invade the United States because of the offenses suffered by the comments of Donald Trump. This is, of course, entirely unreasonable, but just bear with me for the sake of the simulation. So you hear that Mexico is supposed to invade. And Mexico is invading only because they want to remove Donald Trump from power, whatever power he has, right? If you were a pro-Trump general, how would you use your powers to essentially accomplish your goals now that you have been given this situation? And now this is where you guys should be chatting ideas. If anything I said was really confusing, please just ask questions or ask me to rephrase it. I know it was a very, very haphazardly put together situation, but I hope it will make more sense. And if you guys are still really confused about what I said, I can also just talk more about the examples. Okay. Oh, wait. Okay, awesome. So, 45591. I apologize for not knowing your names. It's really weird that they don't let me do that. 45591 said that he would deploy troops on the Mexican border if he was pro-Trump. And this is a great solution, 100% a good idea. If you are pro-Trump and you are a general, you are in charge of troops, you can mobilize troops. And you would mobilize troops using something like a portfolio order. So, portfolio order is basically individual action that you want to take that you don't want other people to know about. You would write down exactly what you want to happen, and you would submit it to the DEA staff, and they would put it into action because they're representing the rest of the world. So, Yatanch, am I saying that correctly? Hopefully I am. Yatanch would deploy troops on the Mexican border because he wants to ensure that Donald Trump stays in power and he doesn't want the Mexicans to remove him from power. So he would use his individual portfolio strengths to do something about it. And then now, because he's deployed troops on the Mexican border, it's going to be much harder for Donald Trump to be removed from power and for Mexico to invade. A threat of a drone strike is also a great solution. But this is also something that, and this is where it becomes really interesting, right? Because I feel like Yatanch took it a step further. He actually went and he deployed troops. Got it. He, like Yatanch, mobilized troops, he put them in action, whereas 1098 threatened a drone strike. And you'd expect, because those are different levels of action, you would get a different level of response, right? So, this is great. This is a great reaction to a poorly created, fabricated situation on my part. My bad. So, okay, now we talked a little bit about what you would do if you were pro-Trump. But what would you do if you were anti-Trump? You are a United States general, Mexico is about to invade to remove Trump from power, and you like that. What ideas do you have about what you could do? And you can be really shady here. You can be really sketchy. You could do illegal activity. You just need to accomplish your goals because, okay, that's a good solution. A negotiator to prevent the actual use of force would definitely help both sides, but it's important to remember that sometimes based on how a situation is created, and negotiators may just be completely ineffective. It's a good way to show that you've exhausted all diplomatic options, but it also may mean that precious time that you could have been using to issue another order or put something into action, you're now using on negotiations which have failed. So it's important to remember that. Um, so in order to take one of these measures, we would create a declaration. Essentially, yes, and that is what a portfolio order is. Portfolio order is just a note that you write secretly that you submit to the data staff, and they put it into action. It's basically you declaring exactly what you want to happen with your forces. So yes. Someone mentioned Article 51, the inherent right of self-defense. Would that be applicable in this scenario? It definitely could be if you wanted to phrase it that way. And that is a great solution. So I was actually thinking more of like illegal activity. Like if I were a general and I wanted Trump to be removed and Mexico was invading, I would provide guns to Mexico. I would give them troops. I would remove my troops from the section of the border that they wanted to invade so that they can come in more easily. I want to get rid of Donald Trump. So I will help the Mexicans who are doing it for me as much as I could. But the inherent right of self-defense, if you are pro-Trump, is definitely something that you could invoke. Because then you can say, hey, we have a right to self-defense. We have a right to invade you. On the other side, you could also do it saying, hey, Mexico has a right to self-defense because we've been threatening them. So maybe we should just stand back and we shouldn't protect ourselves. There's a lot of different things that you can do here, obviously, right? Exactly. You can make the Mexican borders more porous, just like 45591 said. And I think that I already know who that is. My bad. But essentially, as you can see, there are a lot of different ways to be active in crisis given any situation. There are a couple of important things to remember. One, what is your policy overall? Like, what do you want to accomplish at the end of the day, at the end of committee? Number two, what resources do you have at your disposal? Do you have troops? Do you have diplomatic forces? Do you have a location? Do you have like connections to resources? What do you have? I've been in Russia in a lot of my security councils, and I've always incorporated other countries into my crisis plans by telling them I'd give them oil, because I provide all of Europe with oil in those situations. So that's definitely something you can do. I'm going to answer a couple of these questions now, because now they're coming up, and I think people have a better idea of what they should expect. During a crisis, will we be representing our country, or will we be assigned the roles of a person? You will be representing the delegates to the United Nations Security Council. So you will be representing people, but you are going to be carrying out the orders of the upper levels of your country. But that also means that based on things that are happening in the Security Council, you can recommend. You can recommend, hey, Mr. President, I think that we should do this, and they will almost always go with your recommendation because you're the one that's informed. So keep that in mind. If you are pro-Trump, can you threaten to impose economic sanctions on Mexico? As a general, you can threaten to impose them, but keep in mind that you individually can't put sanctions on Mexico because you don't have that power. But you can definitely recommend it as a solution. Is there another way other than a declaration that can be used in order to solve a crisis? Yes, definitely. And right now, what we have just been talking about and demonstrating were portfolio orders. You can also issue a directive, which is exactly it's basically just a list of things that you want to happen, and it represents the body as a whole. So it represents the United Nations Security Council. It represents the Historical Security Council, and it represents all of the members in that body. Basically, if you wanted to have a directive in this case, then you could have the United States National Security Council, the United States security body, issuing a directive saying that they will close off the borders much more. They will issue economic sanctions because they have the power to do that as a body, and they will negotiate with Mexico in order to come up with a diplomatic solution to the conflict. Like, that is an example of a directive. And directives are always more powerful than individual crisis powers because directives represent the entire committee. You can also assassinate Donald Trump, but that is a much more risky maneuver. Could you elaborate on what you mean by lines of communication? I'm not sure. I just want to make sure I understand exactly what you mean. Um, would I prefer two major blocks being formed in a crisis or a single one? Honestly, based on how a lot of security councils work and how a lot of countries' policies are aligned, I would be very, very surprised if one block were created on any crisis, because countries want completely different things, like based on the time period, but also like, for example, in current modern day, there are a lot of countries that are pro-intervention. There are a lot of countries that are anti-intervention, and most crisis updates are going to involve one of like intervention as a potential solution for almost every crisis break. So if if that's the case, then I really can't see a situation where there would just be one block. But that would be great, if there was just one accepted solution to a crisis break, then that's what it is. I am not going to have any preference on that. If I were anti-Trump, I'd issue a hit and sell weapons in the black market just to get rich and chill. Also a very creative, very potentially effective solution. Can you provide any help for the European Commission delegates? Sure. I think as a European Commission delegate, and let me just make sure I am getting all this correct. I think what's important to remember is the body is a little bit bigger than the Security Council, so you are going to have to like you are going to have to answer to more people, but it is not as big as a General Assembly committee, and it is a specific topic, a specialized committee. So just remember that it's going to be much more intense, and the level of content produced by the committee will have to be more specific and at a higher level than anything you produce in a General Assembly. That being said, because it is a futuristic committee, you can make up a lot of the things that you have questions about. If you have questions about the current state of what's happening in Argentina, then you can make that up. And basically, that's really all I can say. But if you have more specific questions about the European Commission, Joe Hall, who's also my roommate, and is the chair of the European Commission, will be giving a webinar on Saturday. So definitely check that out. Can I give you an idea on how the scoring pattern will be? Unfortunately, I cannot disclose that, but I can give you traits that we will be looking for and things that we will encourage. This is also something that we will more directly take care of during committee, and we will talk much more at length about. We're going to be looking for diplomacy, speaking ability, general preparedness and research, general ability to cooperate, how much do delegates move debate forward, all of these traits, essentially. Will the Security Council have crisis, or will only the HSC have them? I believe Rohan will be incorporating crisis elements, but they will be different. So you should definitely email him about that and ask him just to be sure. Is it necessary for certain countries to form a bloc with certain countries? It's a very general question, but it is important. In some cases, yes. In other cases, no. If you are a P5 country in a Security Council and you're the only one that is against something that was brought up in committee, you do not need to form a bloc with other countries because you can just veto it. But it is always better to have other delegates support you. Always better. Better to DAIS, better to committees. More people will like you, and more people will be likely to vote for you. That just is how it works. Always look for cooperation if you can. And if you can't, then do what you have to. Military Staff Committee is still in existence. It's an interesting question. For the current Security Council, yes. I believe for the Historical Security Council, no. But I can check on that, just to be sure. Some tips on research. Sure. Just be as thorough as possible. Understand what your country's policies are at the time of the committee. So if it's present day, it's present day. If it's 1949, it's that. And just have an understanding of what the Security Council can do. If you are the delegate in the room that knows exactly what the Security Council is capable of, you will be indispensable to the rest of the committee. And this is what I found to be consistent across all the Security Councils I've been in. Well, no. Mugging up Chapter 5 of the United Nations Charter, it would help, but I would also read more scholarship about the United Nations Security Council because scholars have found that like legally there are some things the United Nations can do which are not explicitly mentioned in the charter. So I would just um, really take that into account. But yeah, just understand what the Security Council is capable of. When can we access the update papers? The update papers are being edited right now, I believe, and they will be ready within the week. You can expect that. And they will also help clarify some things, some questions that we've received from delegates. Okay, I have 1 more minute left in this webinar, so if there are any last minute questions, I can take care of them now. Otherwise, you guys have been a great group. I really appreciate it. Any last questions? I'll give like 30 seconds. Sometimes they come in a little later. I'm really excited. I hope you guys are. HMUN India is going to be an incredible experience. I have heard, this is my first one, but I've heard nothing but good things about it. And I'm so excited to see what all you delegates come up with and produce for us. We've worked really hard on this experience. All of the committees are going to be fantastic. And I just hope you I hope you come prepared. The more prepared you come, the better it will be for you. And yeah, thank you so much for being so great during this webinar. And I hope you all have a fantastic month, and we'll see you soon. All right. Oh, wait, we have one last question. Enforcement, we have two last questions. Would some solutions that would be provided would have the approval of particular countries? Yes, so I'll rephrase that question. Would some solutions proposed need the approval of specific countries? Only if those countries are involved. If they are not involved, you don't need them. But keep in mind, if you need support from, let's say, the United States in committee for like a military measure, they can veto that like action plan. So you should definitely incorporate them into that conversation if that's something that you want to do. Please elaborate on the enforcement measures of the Security Council. Sure. So everything the Security Council does can be enforced. The enforcement measures really are up to you guys, like as delegates. You guys need to specify timelines. You guys need to specify who's in charge. You guys need to just really like create the enforcement measures yourselves, especially for the Historical Security Council, because a lot of the things that have been talked about there or are being talked about there have never come up in a Security Council before. So you guys are designing all the enforcement measures from scratch. All right, great. I am so glad this was helpful. And if you guys have any other questions, please feel free to email me at hsc@hmunindia.org, and I will be happy to answer any and all questions. Great. Thanks so much, and have a good one.